Good morning, everyone. This is Chris Korupati from Cambrian Lab. Today's session, the topic is Build Better Products Faster. As part of this session, we'll be covering digital workflows for new product introduction excellence. With me is my colleague, Manish Mathur. As far as the session is concerned, we've split it into three parts. In the first part, which should be around 10 to 12 minutes, we will cover some of the intricacies and challenges of new product introduction, especially as it relates to when you have complicated supply chains. The second part of that, which will be the bulk of the session, will be we will showcase some of the workflows, innovative workflows that we have developed, as well as certain assessments and checks that help new product introduction program, as well as end-to-end execution. Towards the end, we will leave about 15 minutes or so for Q&A, so that we have an opportunity to answer your questions. As far as Q&A is concerned, it is very likely that you will have questions as we are covering the topic. During the topic as well as during the demo. For the sake of continuity, we will answer all the questions towards the end. However, you can type in the question, if you have any, in the Q&A tab of your Zoom bar. That would be number 4 or number 3, depending upon your Zoom bar, the third tab there. Okay, just feel free to type in the question so that we can, answer those towards the end. It's a good idea to type in the question in Q&A because they get recorded, and we can share that with the rest of the presentation and video of this session when we send all the content back to you later in the day or tomorrow. Okay, with that. A little bit about Cambrian Lab. We are a California-based company with teams in several states in the U.S. Our focus primarily is on new product introduction and supply chain development related to NPI. Today, we do work with several industries that are involved in complex design, manufacturing, and have significant supply chains, and that would be the focus of a lot of the topic that we'll be covering today. We will be showcasing our solution, ZFlow, which is a digital workflow management solution for the modern supply chain. It supports a number of supply chain focused workflows which span the whole new product introduction process, as well as several other related areas like supplier development, quality management, and so on. About the panelists, with me is my colleague Manish. We both have about 20 plus years of experience, both operational and solution development, and new product development, PLM, supply chain. And we've all, both of us worked actually in the automotive industry as well as in high tech for several years. And it's based upon this experience that we've developed some of our thoughts as well as solutions around NPI excellence. If you look at new product introduction today, it's a great tweet recently that I saw from Elon Musk, which said, it's a good thing that great design engineering of products are critical, but it is often that bringing that product, the design, to reality, which involves significant levels of manufacturing and supply chain work, is an orders of magnitude more complex than just designing certain things. And you can see some of the reasons. It's always NPI, new product introduction teams are always challenged for a number of reasons, including time issues. The life cycles are pretty short. You always want to do a flawless launch, but something or other seems to happen. And today's world, supply chains are anything but certain. So you need to have a robust viewpoint on how you're going to develop and build a supply chain that can support your new product introduction effort, and of course, continue to produce the product and service it. And what we have noticed is a lot of organizations struggle a lot in new product introduction, and what we call is orchestration, because it's really a series of activities done in a very coordinated fashion. If you look at from market research all the way to production, there are many teams involved. If you're designing and manufacturing anything complicated, you have lots of suppliers involved, and coordinating all of these complex activities can be very difficult. And yet, a lot of what we have noticed is NPI is generally practiced as type of more of a project, as opposed to a synchronized set of processes. And that's our focus here, is to get away from the project mode and really drive it as a coordinated set of workflows. And of course, what is really standing between NPI excellence and an organization is really the continuation of processes and information silos, right? There is still not uncommon the way people and teams and cross-functional teams still work. There's a little bit of a silo approach to how things get done with respect to NPI. Purchasing may be working with just suppliers, and NPI is just focused on design. There may not be very seamless coordination between those types cross-functional teams. Now, if you add in suppliers into this mix, the degree of difficulty is even more increased, right? Because suppliers are not sitting in the same building. Of course, today in the world of pandemic, nobody is sitting in the same room or same building. But because there are organizational boundaries, it is very hard to integrate suppliers very easily and closely as you're doing NPI. So that's actually prompted us. That's one of the reasons why we've actually developed ZFlow. The way we approach NPI is quite different. We see it as a process orchestration, which is made up of a number of coordinated workflows. The other approach that is important when you're doing NPI is you need, at any given time, people are doing lots of different assessments on readiness and, do we have the right thing in the right place? Are our suppliers ready? You need to be able to support these types of assessments directly as part of these workflows. And of course, it is a good idea if you are able to involve suppliers, and in some cases even customers, as part of the NPI process. That makes it a lot more easy. The key idea is to be able to do it very seamlessly, as if they're part of your organization, a virtual organization around NPI. And it's also, of course, important to be able to integrate with a lot of the different engineering systems, ERP and sourcing, etc., as you're doing that. So we will look at some of these different aspects of how do you orchestrate an NPI process, and lots of different workflows in these areas. We will look at it, not everything, but some key areas where coordination and workflows are important to orchestrate NPI from an overall process perspective. You also use the same techniques to support industries-focused NPI processes. For example, in the case of automotive, it is common to have advanced product quality planning as the product development framework, right? And you can call it an NPI framework. How do you set up such scenarios? And the other thing that we observe, and this is especially true if you are in medical devices or long-lived products, there is a lot of sustaining engineering and continuous improvement that happens after NPI. However, what we have noticed is there is nothing systematic about it, or how should it be driven as a program? That's another thing that we'll look at, because we see sustaining engineering driven from multiple angles, both from a improvements that are observed or identified, dealing with failures in the field or anywhere. And of course, your supply chain also keeps changing, which means you have to react to changes in your supply chain as part of your sustaining engineering. So those are some things that we'll look at. Of course, our mission with our solution and what we are doing is to really help you get time to market faster. It's not easy, but at least this is our earnest attempt to help organizations improve their NPI and sustaining engineering processes. Okay, you will see a number of these types of scenarios today as part of our demo. We'll see certain stage gate type of workflows. How do you set up those? How do you use stage gate type of approaches to do orchestration? And then, of course, how to make suppliers integral to any of the workflows that are relevant for NPI. Okay, we will see all of these, how we handle information that is related to NPI. And as part of the certain workflows, we also integrate directly with your ERP systems or sourcing or design systems. We'll look at some of these techniques that are proving to be fairly useful in today's world. And a couple of things that we do want to highlight. I think this has become an important need in the industry on how to handle component engineering related issues. And finally, we will cover a little bit about how you can integrate all of these different workflows directly into engineering systems, as well as ERP and sourcing. And with that, what I will do is get started with the demo scenario. Please feel free to add questions into the Q&A bar as we are showing the demo scenarios. And we'll answer the questions towards the end. Okay, so in the demo scenario, we've split the scenario into multiple sections just to be able to cover all various aspects of NPI excellence. A lot of times, when you're doing NPI programs, you do use different strategies. You may have developed an NPI workflow within your organization that you want to follow. We'll look at how you can use either industry standard scenario workflows or workflow NPI process workflows that you may have been using within your organization. In the second, we'll look at a few NPI-based assessments and readiness checks. You can apply those with respect to a bill of material. As part of NPI, a lot of people, a lot of organizations also do a lot of work with sourcing. We will look into a few of those scenarios and close it off with a couple of component engineering and sustaining engineering workflows. Okay. With that, what I will do is take you to the solution. ZFlow, everything in ZFlow is organized as either workflows or assessments or data that you work with as part of NPI workflows. So if you can see here, we have seen, program management, lots of different workflows related to product engineering, certain work or objects that you handle as part of product planning, right, such as DFMEAs, risk assessments, and you will see that we also handle a lot of parts, products. That's a big part of what we do when we're doing NPI support, right? NPI process. Similarly, component engineering, sourcing, different workflows and assessments that you will see. As part of the program management, it is common for people to use several different types of techniques. Whether you follow a stage-gate product process or advanced product quality planning program. Sometimes people also close it off with the production part approval process, or even involve suppliers as part of PPAP. So if we're going to open an APQP program here. So as you can see, right now we are running two different APQP programs. These are, if you are responsible and you own the product and the design, it is common to use something like an APQP program as the way to guide your new product introduction workflow. And within APQP program, you can set it up based upon how it should be done from an NPI process orchestration perspective. So if you look at it, we are doing an NPI APQP-based NPI program for ZFlow Next. There are, of course, a lot of different items from a program perspective that we need to accomplish, right? You can see those. We are also identified certain program risks, right? What they are, both from a system component perspective as well as process perspective. Like, of course, here, 8NX system component is, availability could be an issue, so we have some risk priority numbers so that, people can pay attention and close out these risks. The big part of what we do as part of process orchestration is here really is the workflow. How do you set up a stage gate type of workflow? That is the approach that, APQP really recommends. And within that, if you look at the different stages, there is phase 1, which is plan and define, stage 2, product design and development, process design and development, validation, and launch and corrective actions, right? So that's how, these different activities are set up, different stage gate process activities. So each of these, obviously, phase 1, plan and define, is itself made up of a number of different tasks, right? So if you were to look at it within this, we have, from organizing the team to voice of the customer, all of these need to be actually done. I mean, this is not just a task, right? There are people involved, there are assessments as well as analysis that needs to be done. So what we have done here is to nicely define this whole, stage gate process as a series of both orchestration steps, so that people can actually go do this. And if you notice, we can actually even specify who can do it, right? And, within this orchestration environment, people actually can complete the tasks and actually even drive specific workflows. For example, here in the phase 2 state, product design and development, we have to do release engineering drawings. Now, release engineering drawings could be a task, or if you really want to make sure that it gets done, you want to actually start a workflow. So here in this case, we've actually have a connected workflow here. If you notice this here, we are actually releasing the engineering drawings. Directly related to that are different people that are going to be doing this activity, and the specific workflow that they're going to be using to actually do this release engineering drawings, right? So here people are going to be doing in this workflow, because it is a board, So we know it is an RF front-end board, right? So it has the different board components, etc. What people will be doing is the cross-functional team that comes together. And this is all happening under this program execution, right? So that's why we call it process orchestration. So NPI process started off as an APQP. And in phase 2 of that, we need to do some release engineering drawings. And that has been set up as a specific workflow. And now people that are cross-functional teams that are responsible for this, like, you have engineering, manufacturing, safety, regulatory, and specific people that play a role will follow this workflow process to actually do this. Right? They're going to be importing it from Mentor Graphics. If there is a need for manufacturer qualification as part of this, they will be doing that. And that may result in another process here. For example, we have this data here, envelope tracking IC, which is part of the board. It doesn't have a manufacturer selected yet, or the design engineering team has selected the manufacturer, but they have not approved to be a supplier yet, right? So we are going to be doing some related workflow underneath this. So to actually qualify the component as well as the manufacturer. Following that, we might actually order some prototype parts, build the board, do some verification testing. So underneath this one task is a pretty elaborate workflow that is actually doing all of the work underneath it. And once this workflow is finished is when it comes back and sets it as released engineering drawings finished. The status of the task will be completed here. So normally, when people do NPI process orchestration, we have seen people work with project plans and Kanban systems and tasking systems, and assume that the task, once it is allocated to a certain person, it is done. And that's not, because we are a workflow orchestration engine for NPI, we actually, for each of these different specific tasks, we in fact design a particular type of workflow that is specific to this task item here, and actually complete it with cross-functional teams. So when you take this approach, you have a complete view of how things are getting done, right? So if you look at it, there are a lot of these. This is probably a little bit dense here, but APQP is like that. It's a pretty elaborate NPI orchestration run. Now, the interesting thing here is we are actually doing a what we call supplier APQP as well as part of that. So if you notice, we have different, obviously the program that we are doing is ZFlow Next here. So it has lots of different systems, subsystems, like, components that other manufacturers are designing or have designed that we are procuring, right? And, we may be subcontracting out certain components to be manufactured. So essentially, it's a fairly complex product that we are building. And you need to be able to do a lot of work with suppliers. And that's the reason why, since A10X is a very key component, and we are using Intel as a supplier for this, primary supplier, you may actually need to support a APQP process or PPAP process just for Intel, right? Because you do have to do supplier PPAPs as part of large programs. And that's actually what is happening here. So there is as part of this overall APQP for ZFlow Next, we've actually set up one for Intel. right? And and this is a sub process. It has its own supplier PPAP workflows. I mean, this is also again a phase one, phase gate type of approach, 4 or 5 phases. But this is something that Intel would be doing it, okay, for you. And so that the work that your suppliers are doing is flowing into your overall APQP program. Okay, so you're back to here. Now, this is where we are taking a strategy of, you have a lot of suppliers, and then you want to be really able to work with them as and when there is a need. So as a result, we've actually allow seamless integration of suppliers into your workflows. So here is a good example of, this is actually a supplier, Chris Kuropati on the left-hand side here. It says Launchpad for Supplier Administrator. This is a supplier that is logging into the same workflow engine here. When the suppliers log in, they only see what is relevant for them. In which case, we've made him part of members of certain supplier PPAP activities. We've also included them in one supplier RFP response, and they can be part of certain supplier audits. If you imagine, if you're doing NPI programs and you have lots of suppliers, you need to be able to kind of bring them on new suppliers and then develop them into organizations that are capable of supporting what you're doing. And that's how these workflows are designed, so that they allow new suppliers joining in NPI programs and work with you and get to a level where they can do the job well. And we believe supplier PPAPs are a great way of doing it, because PPAP is a very elaborate process depending upon the level, right? So here in this case, the level is, we've decided these are the 3 elements that we are asking Intel to submit at this point, right? Now we'll be adding more and more of that later on. So Intel, when they come in, they can participate in this. When their workflow activity becomes real, they can come back and provide you with all of these elements, which you can approve or reject, and then it goes back to the supplier until everything is ready. So you want to make sure that they're doing everything that is needed to support what is relevant for your organization, right? From a PPAP support perspective. So your PPAPs, either depending upon what you're doing, they can be as elaborate as possible. Either you are doing the PPAP. So this is an example of a workflow where if your customer is expecting you to provide PPAPs, you'll be doing this internally. And if you look at this workflow, you have the submission setup. You're internally going to be preparing all the elements of the PPAP, do an internal review, approvals, and then submit to customer. And you can make it a pretty elaborate one depending upon what your customer needs are. From having design records in one place, right? The pod drawings that you're going to submit. So this whole PPAP package, once internally is done and approved, can be sent over to the customer. Now, of course, this is something that we have kept it simple, but you can also design each of these elements to become workflows or data items itself. So in this case, we've just put a internally prepared DFMEA that can go in, okay, along with it. So either all of these can be different data elements or workflows that are completed and provide the information that is needed. Okay, so that's kind of program management aspects of it. We would call it program orchestration because they can go very, very deep in the level of execution needed from an NPI process perspective. The next scenario are, while you're doing it, we've also found the need for a number of assessments and readiness checks. And readiness checks, they can happen in multiple facets. So we'll look at a couple of them. So as you're working with a product, for example, in this case, we had a PPAP program, right, for ZFlow Next. And if you look at the product, so just so that we do handle pretty much the whole information, product supply chain related information. Often it is expressed as bills of materials and related suppliers, and both from a minimum order, lead times, etc. All of that is something that we keep track of, because essentially, if you're doing NPI orchestration with your supply chain, you need to build up that piece of information by working with your suppliers. So here, we are in the process of the NPI as well as related supply chain development. You can do certain assessments along the way. One such assessment is, sourcing type of assessment, right? Which is, hey, what is we look at our bill of materials. We have lots of components, both from an external manufacturing, internal, external sourcing, and certain procured services, etc. We need to understand what they are, and especially for certain types of components, you also need to do multi-sourced assessments. These are component based assessments that you have to do to see, can we live with one approved supplier? Can we live with 2, 3, and so on, so that you have some robustness within your supply chain. The other thing that we do keep track of is, when you're working with suppliers, you need to understand, how qualified they are, if they have reached certain preferred status, so that you have a good relationship with suppliers. One of the things that we are finding today is, if you are not seen as a preferred customer, which means you have a preferred supplier relationship, you may be down on the list in terms of servicing and allocation of parts. All right. So it's in your interest to get as many preferred suppliers as possible. So within this product program, while qualified is okay, and active suppliers are where you already have a purchasing relationship, clearly there is a lot of work, because there are no suppliers for 9 of these components still. Right. So those are the types of assessments that you can do. You can also, depending upon the lead times that suppliers are giving, or you determine. So each of these cases, we know exactly who is as you're doing supplier selections, who the suppliers are, what their lead times are, what the cost. So we do keep track of, how the cost is evolving throughout the NPI life cycle. Okay. So you can run that lead time assessments, right? Who would be, if you have to. One of the things that we found in NPI is, you still have NPI build, prototype building needs. Even there, when you are trying to order, when you are trying to set certain dates for NPI builds, whether it is validation, prototypes, or etc., obviously you need to have correct manufacturers, but you also need to know who can actually provide you with the components as part of that build process, right? So we provide some lead time assessment tools to support such efforts. And finally, you can even run, what we call readiness checks. For example, this is an example of, there is a readiness framework that our one of our customers is working on. So where they check the whole product for its readiness. And you will see this thing is it's a little bit wide. So, right. So these are all the different readiness elements, right? In a verification report. So at different stages of the life cycle, you need to different ones. But by and large, you will see, if you're working with different components and subsystems, what are required, from a readiness check perspective, and where they are in terms of status, right? So you can run these types of assessments and checks based upon what has happened with respect to this subsystem component, both from an internal process perspective as well as supply chain readiness perspective. Okay, and that might actually even, we sometimes go and check inventory, especially if you're doing builds which use production components into those NPI builds. You need to check inventory and understand if the purchasing is set up properly, what the planned delivery times are. This is where we actually do a lot of work in terms of integrating directly to various systems. So here, there are lots of different systems, from SAP, from an ERP perspective, to PLM design systems, where NPI initial concepts are all coming together, where we have to work with it as you're building the supply chain, as well as readiness checks and getting ready for launch, and the various steps in between. So there are a lot of these tools that we provide as part of the overall framework itself, NPI process framework itself. I'll quickly take you through a couple of other scenarios. Part of what you do when you're doing NPI, executing on it, is, you also need a lot of new suppliers coming in. You might actually do certain requests for proposals and requests for quotes. You may have to do some supplier evaluations, specific sourcing evaluations. One such workflow that I will show you here is this RFP workflow, where you are kind of requesting certain information and kind of rough proposal for one of the parts, okay, production parts, and that production part drawing is here, right? We need 1,000 of those. It could be this is still in a pre-production state, and then the mold to be done. So you can run these RFP, RFQ type of things at various stages of the NPI process, either for prototype builds or for even production quotes. Part of that is you need to be able to ask and say, hey, send these out to these two different suppliers. What this workflow is, a pretty unique workflow, is that it will look at the supplier, the new suppliers, and sends out two different RFP response workflows. So if you look at this from a high level, so we're doing a quick RFP for two suppliers, Intel and Qualcomm. Qualcomm is, of course, a new supplier, not a supplier yet, prospective supplier. And each of this, because we've added two, if you had four, it would be four sub workflows. If you had one, it would be just one, right? So in this case, we have two, which actually sends out to the supplier and asks supplier for response, and comes back and collates it and provides you with a consolidated view. So here, in this case, to the left here, I'm Intel, right? I should have gotten a supplier RFP response. Here I got it, right? So if I open it, all it is it's showing me exactly what it is. And we just need to provide specific answers. One is price per unit of measure. We have the quantity and the expected delivery date. So this way, you can be doing these RFP, RFQs throughout the NPI process quickly and get information and make certain decisions around, what type of, who should we use at different stages. And of course, there are lots of workflows for new supplier requests and sourcing evaluations. We also do intricate sourcing type of evaluations based upon various facets of what the need is, right? So here is a good example of a sourcing evaluation we are doing for 810X among 3 suppliers, right? And the evaluation criteria is cost, quality, and delivery, right? We want to do against minimum order quantity, lead time. And you can see the different weightages. And this is actually sent out to internal teams. Hey, we are trying to pick 3 of them. Most of the time they are done for engineering, logistics, quality, right? And each of these teams in this workflow here, this is a pretty, seems to be a workflow that is getting popular, especially for sourcing evaluations, vendor assessments, where you have to, based upon certain facets, evaluate different proposals, etc., or different suppliers. It actually selects and gets information from multiple people within the organization, and creates an overall score. Okay, so you can do these things very, very quickly. What has been an issue for a lot of especially NPI sourcing teams is all of this was being done in a very ad hoc fashion, and takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort to do this. And the thing is, it's done in silos, so nobody knows. Here, we are making all of these different workflows so that everybody is involved in this, right? So sourcing evaluation means, you have different members. You have, obviously, if you look at the RFP, in this case, all of the specific people that should be part of this RFP process are actually in this workflow. At different parts of the workflow, they will come in and do it, right? Reviewing RFP responses, they're doing collectively. Select the supplier, of course, strategic sourcing is doing it, but it is being done as a cross-functional team. Okay, I will finally show some sustaining engineering type of scenarios. Obviously, sustaining engineering can happen along 2 different angles. At least one is, improvement opportunities. Where, for example, you have a failure, right? It can happen in different places, whether it could be manufacturing failure, in the field failure, corrective action requests, and so on. So we have a failure. And how do we deal with this? We need to include that as part of a program so that this failure is dealt with as part of sustaining engineering program in an effective fashion and fast, right? So what we have done here is created these connected workflows. Actually, as a matter of fact, this failure came from an RMA. So if you look at this, there was an RMA, which is a very good place to look for if you want to see what customers are finding from a failure event perspective. Following that, you do a failure report, failure assessment, failure analysis. And then as part of failure analysis, people determine we need to do a corrective action. And that final corrective action is actually an engineering change request and change order, right? So if you're thinking of sustaining engineering, these are all the events that lead to different types of product changes, manufacturing process changes, and supply chain changes, right? So you need to be able to organize all of this and orchestrate this. So failure event is another one. The other one that is very common, very popular among our, especially high-tech customers, is what we call PCN, right? PCNs, it's a fact of life. If you have lots of electronic components, people, they're going end of life, or people are making changes, which may, depending upon the type of product, if you're in medical devices, every PCN needs to be evaluated to see it has any impact on your products or not. So in this case, Broadcom is doing end of life for the baseband, right? We have Broadcom using it as part of, guess what? We have it in Z Phone X, we have it in Y Phone, and the actual product it is in, the BOM, is a communications module, is where that whole MPN manufacturer part is being used, because it is the internal part number is Broadcom. So we use lots of manufacturing part numbers to do certain matching to see the impact, right? So these three are impacted. Now what do? Right? We have to put this thing through a sustaining engineering program again, right? And part of that is a sustaining engineering program around components may involve a component change request. So this can launch these component change requests saying, hey, we need a new manufacturer instead of Broadcom. Please go ahead and do it. So it can have its own workflow, different members that play a role in this, now selecting a new manufacturer for this component, for this baseband component, right? And following that, we also actually have something called end-of-life assessments, where you may decide you need to find a replacement part and also check what to do with existing inventory right there. So you can set up these types of sustaining engineering workflows that deal with failure, as well as deal with supply chain oriented changes, your own internal changes. So and this is a very popular one for PCN, right? And then finally, all of those could be done as a program, sustaining engineering program. You can collect all of them together and say, hey, we are going to do this as like a program, right? Deal with PCN in this cycle, and also see if we can actually do some BOM cost reduction as part of these programs. So I'm going to stop here because we have 10 minutes to handle any Q&A, and look at the Q&A section and answer any questions you have. The question, yes, we will be sending a presentation of this, as well as a video recording of this whole session, once we get the recording from Zoom. So you can expect it maybe by tomorrow or late tomorrow. You'll have all of the links, as well as place to go and download the presentation. There was another question. Can you have a selection of workflows so that the user can pick based on the project type? Yes. So it is not uncommon. For example, here, we've just put APQP program and stage gate. So you can, depending upon the type of program that you do, whether it's sustaining projects or strategic projects or brand extensions or just like a line extension, you can set it up based upon the the needs of that specific program. They will all be available as different workflows following different what called workflow activities and projects. So for example, here, this is a very simple one, right? They just do 3-4 steps, and then they're primarily finished. So the level of design, you can design yourself. Most of the time, our customers design their own workflows across the board, from NPI programs to all the way down to specific workflows. You can set it up like that. Any other questions, please type it into the Q&A bar, or even chat is okay. There is a question on so there is another question: is data hosted local? Yes, most of our customers, especially for NPI, they are setting it up in their own virtual private cloud or data center. Because we deal so much with NPI data, and it is connected really heavily to the design systems. It is available as an on-premise system. That means you own the data, you have complete control over everything. We do provide a lot of APIs, and the file storages, everything is yours. And when we do keep the system up to date, we have an update service, so it's always, most of the time, it is the latest changes that we provide on a quarterly basis. They get updated if you select a button, pick a button. Is there a way to quantify risk? Yes, we do provide several methods to quantify risk. Obviously, FMEA is one place. We also provide some techniques to do certain risk scoring, weight-based risk scoring. For example, if you're looking at supply chain risk here, this is based upon risk categories and risk weightage. Underneath, you can actually expand it to include what are the different elements of the subcategories of that risk, right, which roll up to quality risk. And we usually try to get it into a single score so that it makes sense. And it's all based upon the weightages and what is the normalized score. Do you like to see it as based on 10 or 100? The risk range. So you can develop this this model per your need. So we are also working a little bit on, there is a need, some cases on supply chain, I would say, development, risk assessment, the actual overall supply chain. But it is something, it's a work in process. So if you look at the supply chain here, here people are going a little bit deeper. So this is like an iPhone supply chain. For the US region, it includes sub-suppliers. A lot of times the risks are spread in multiple areas, right? If I look at the review, they keep track of certain issues, risk items, at specific locations. So that the important thing is we use FMEA type of risk assessment, risk priority numbers a lot in different places, so that you can actually do certain current controls and put recommended actions, etc. for if you find risk in different places. And these can be, recommended action can be a process, so it actually gets done, not just have a number or someone to enter data. The one thing that we want to get away from is everything can be actionable in here, which means even a line item can be a process. Okay, so like in DFMEAs, often, you need to, each of these recommended action can lead to actually a workflow that you can do on, right? Okay, this is another example of it's a simple risk assessment. This is based upon some categorization of risk, right? So depending upon a requirement, clarity of requirements and technology certainty, right? So then, people can really use this to focus where should be the effort from a risk management perspective. Okay. Another thing that I do want to highlight here is how about reporting tools? Yes, we do provide a number of reporting tools. Many of these come out of the box. For example, if I go back here, there are reporting tools both from a process perspective, and there are also reporting tools from an overall kind of, I would say, how are things perspective, right? So if you look at the APQP program, you want to understand, hey, what is our timeline, right? To understand how are we doing. And this is a timeline specific for this one program, right? Whereas if you go to overall, I don't know if it'll generate enough, but it will actually do a full kind of assessment based on the total number of programs, right, that are going through. And you will actually get for every workflow that you have in the system. For example, if I pick a new board development, and how long does it take? If I look at the cycle time, this is like 85 days average is what it is taking to do it. And you can see some of these are not available because they were done on the same time. But you can see, what are the typical activity times that it is taking. So the more the processes go through, the more statistics you get. Beyond that, we also provide a way to build your own reports. There's a reporting tool here based on the data within the system. And we also actually generate some automatic reports based upon the data set that we have. For example, here, these are quality events, which based upon the quality event process workflow that is currently going through. So there are a variety of techniques, many that come out of the box, and others you can build your own type of approach. Okay, we have a couple more minutes. If you have any other questions, please type it in. The other thing that you can do, since we'll be running out of time in a minute, is you can also, once you get our the presentation as well as the links to the video, you'll have our email. Feel free to send us any questions that you have. We do want to leave you with an offer, which is we do a lot of fairly large customers actually have been testing ZFlow, and actually they're testing what is called a free proof of concept. Most of the time, NPI flows are fairly custom to different organizations. What they are doing is using ZFlow to set up, design their own NPI workflows, NPI program orchestration. If you're interested in that, we would be more than happy to support it. It runs on our own AWS. Depending upon the needs, we can also run it within your own organization as a free POC. So feel free to reach out to us if you're interested in a free POC, and we will definitely support it. We do tens of them. Our team is involved. Our customer success team will be involved and guide you through that process and how everything comes together. With that, we're going to close the session. Thanks again for taking your very precious time today, this morning, to join the session. Hopefully, you've enjoyed some of what we are doing and find it effective and useful. Again, if you like what you saw, we would be more than happy to support a POC. So expect the content with the link to the presentation and the recording within the next day or two. And feel free to reach out to us once you get it. Okay. Thank you again for your time. Have a great day.